Alrighty. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kyle Metzger. I am the temple head, the acting temple head of the Four Pillars Proto Temple, which is located in. We're actually in Northfield right now. We're moving to Austintown, Ohio. So we're located in Austintown, soon to be Austintown. And so I actually have a double bachelor's degree in religious studies and theater studies, in addition to my studies in the Korean tradition. So it's a lot of fun. Religion excites me all around, like all religion, all practices, beliefs, just it's so exciting to me. So I really was very interested in Shinto, and so that's why I wanted to do a workshop on Shinto. I decided to discuss Shinto in this class because I feel it's a deeply relevant topic to understanding indigenous faiths as a whole, as well as to illustrate the breadth and potential of indigenous faiths in society today. Because Shinto was a faith that, up until right before World War II, was a state religion sanctioned by the state, was practiced on a government level. So just being able to kind of see how an indigenous faith was able to become so important, I think, is really cool. So that's kind of part of the reason, one of the reasons why. Shinto, in its day, Shinto developed from a primitive, simple faith into a state religion of an influential nation. Obviously, we're referring to Japan. Shinto has many parallels with Wicca and other forms of European indigenous faiths, which is another layer that fascinates me personally. Little information is available on Shinto in America due to the fact that Shinto hasn't really been translated into English, because Shinto, being an indigenous faith, it exists in a certain place at a certain time. So saying, okay, well the gods now are over here and they're now in America, it doesn't really translate like that, you know what I mean? So the gods exist, the kami, we're going to talk more about what kami means, but the kami exist in Japan at a certain time, a certain place, and so trying to translate them and bring them out of their soil to foreign soil isn't very easy. And so that's why, part of the reason why Shinto isn't really well known today. The other thing is that Shinto hasn't been translated from Japanese to English. So the only way for you to learn about Shinto is by knowing Japanese. I do not know Japanese. But I've been able to rustle up a couple books to give enough information about what Shinto is to help explain a lot to you guys too, which is really cool. So it is kind of difficult. So as an indigenous, I want to say there are several different parts to this workshop. We're going to talk a little bit about Shinto, and then we're also going to play with some of the things that I have up here. I'm going to show you what all this stuff is, what it's for, what it means, and then at the end we're going to do a little bit of a workshop. Of course, as we know, this weekend is all about magic and about magic at every level. That's the theme of this Lustration weekend. So we're going to talk about magic in terms of divine magic, maybe what he would call upper level magic, what Phoenix would refer to that as upper level magic, magic that is interacting with high level spirits and things of that nature. So that's what we're going to do toward the end of the workshop as well. So as an indigenous faith of Japan, Shinto had no desire to define itself. It just was. Okay, so Shinto existed the way it was. People got up every day and they honored the sun, and they brought in the harvest, and they buried their dead, and it didn't have a reason to be anything other than just what it was. There was no name for it. There was no predefined way of practice. People just lived their lives. So it wasn't until Buddhism came into Japan that Shinto decided, hey, we need to figure out what exactly we are, what exactly we mean, what exactly are we, and how are we different from Buddhism. So that's we're going to talk a little bit about that later as well. Once the cultural imports from China came into Japan, the pre-existing faith had no choice but to begin to define itself. Early Shinto was simply viewed as the way of life. It was a way of life. With no defining factors. Later on, when the Chinese came in, they started to refer to Shinto as Shendo. Shen meaning spirit, and Do meaning the way. Like you think of Tao, or anything that's Tao basically means the way. So Shendo meant the way of the spirit. So it came to be known as Shinto, right? Another way, which is probably a more appropriate name for the religion, is called Kami no Michi, which means the way of the kami. Kind of like it's a way of life, but it's a practice of worshiping of the kami specifically, so it's called Kami no Michi. Shinto also is indigenous, so it of course began in Japan, it's still in Japan, it's related to Japan, to natural resources and places in Japan, Mount Fuji, all the mountains in Japan, all the valleys, all that stuff. It's very intrinsic to the religion of Shinto. but it also is animistic, which of course, as we know, means that they believe in spirits in everything. Spirits in rocks, and spirits in trees, and spirits in mountains, and all kinds of stuff. There is a really important, I think I mentioned it in here too, a really important form of Shinto worship. It was rock worship. So if you go to a Shinto shrine, you might find sacred rocks on the grounds that are demarcated in certain ways, and we'll talk more about that as well. So Shinto, at the very essence, worships the kami of nature. The term kami translates to spirits. However, it's a little bit more complex than that because a kami can be anything. We might think of kami spirits as being like ancestral spirits or as being divine spirits, but it also is spirits of rocks and spirits of trees. But it's also what we in the West might consider to be fairies, gnomes, sprites, all that kind of stuff is also included in that kami definition. So it really is any sort of spirit. There are different levels of spirits, which we'll talk about here. So they're frequently divided into three levels. First, you have the Amatsu kami. The Amatsu kami are the higher level kami. They're considered to be the divine heavenly kami, Amatsu kami. So the heavenly kami exist in the heavenly realm. Most of them existed before the earth was created. We're going to talk more about the Shinto creation myth in a minute, but most of them were there before the world was created. So, and then they kind of trickled down to earth and other places. So they're the heavenly kami. They're more celestial kami. They're normally more paramount and predominant kami, like for instance Amaterasu. If anyone's ever heard of Amaterasu, she's the one of the principal kami in Japan. She's believed to be the patroness of the royal family and of Japan in general. It is believed that the emperors of Japan are directly descended from her grandson, Jimmu. Emperor Jimmu was believed to be the first emperor of Japan, and then he was also the great-grandson of Amaterasu, Omikami. So there's a direct relationship with the royalty in Japan, the royal family even today, with Amaterasu. So which is very, very heavenly, very predominant. And then the next level of kami are kunitsu kami. Those are the earthly kami. Those are the kami that exist on earth, the kami that are in the rocks, the kami that are in the trees, the kami that exist on earth. And then you have a third designation of kami, which is called yayotsuru no kami. Those ones are kind of like just the other kami. They're kind of just like the catch-all category for any other kami. And so you find, Shinto has become very, very localized. You might find a Shinto kami that exists in a certain area that won't really make a difference to anybody anywhere else. And then of course you find like kami of general things, like they actually have kami of sweet potatoes. Yakime. You also find kami of other, just various things, kami of root vegetables or something, kami of trees. And then there's a particular kami for a particular tree. So there might be a kami of oak trees, for instance, but there might be a kami spirit in that oak tree. You know what I'm saying? So you find that as well. And you kind of see the parallels a little bit as I'm discussing it between Wicca and Shinto. It's kind of self-evident in that way. So as I said, the Amatsu kami are more cosmological in nature. They're heavenly kami. These spirits are the beginning of creation. Some of the first kami that appeared on Earth were Amatsu kami. Whereas the Amatsu kami are the gods and goddesses of the pantheon, kunitsu kami are the earthly spirits that interact with the common society and humans. So you might think of, to parallel, thinking of, for instance, Greek mythology. You might think of Athena as being an Amatsu kami, right? She's one of the Olympian gods. She lives in heaven and on Mount Olympus. And then you have something like a satyr or a nymph, which is more of a kunitsu kami. It's like an earthly kami. Does that make sense? So there's kind of a parallel between that. A very important stimulus for the change and development in Shinto came from the interjection of Buddhism into Japan from China. So Buddhism began in India, it moved into China, and then eventually into Korea, and then came over into Japan. And when it came over, it was known as Qian in China. And when it came to Japan, it became known as Zen. So when Zen came to China, it came in the 6th century. From Korea, it came into China during the 6th century, where it became eventually known as Zen. The nobles and the elite, as it always goes, were the ones who adopted that practice and the worship of not necessarily worship, but the veneration of the Buddha and things of that nature into it. And due to the long history of Buddhism, when it came to Japan, it was like a neat little box with a bow. It was like, here you go, here's Buddhism. It was already put together. They already had liturgy. They already had rituals. They already had mantras and chants and practices and, you know, calendar, everything. Everything was already there. So when it came to Japan, Japan's like, what are we doing? You know what I mean? Like, we're just living our lives, doing our own thing, whatever. And then finally, like, wait a minute. Maybe we should try to do something kind of like them. Maybe we should start, you know, because they didn't have, we're going to talk a little more about that, they didn't have temples. They didn't have things like that. Like in Buddhism, they did. They came and they said, set up shop. Here's our temple. There's the Buddha. There's whoever. And they made a whole thing out of it. In Japan, they didn't have that. It was just like, this is their life. So then Japan started to kind of self-reflect a little bit and started to come up with some different changes in their practice, which took place during the 6th century. The introduction of Buddhism influenced and inspired a new form of Shinto that was structured with priests, with a type of liturgy, loosely defined because Shinto doesn't really have a liturgy, and defined rituals. In many ways, this reformed Shinto, my words, retained much of the earlier form and the earlier flavor. Although strictly speaking, Shinto doesn't really have a founder. There was no person that said, hey, let's practice Shinto. There was really no person like that. There's really no doctrine. There's really no sacred texts or any idols.
So it was mainly, excuse me, it was mainly derived from a particular family per se. Like, how would you compare that to? Would you compare that to like the Corellian family? Or
there is,
as an analogy.
Yes, there is some evidence of that later. In early Shinto, they called it Ko-Shinto. That was like prehistoric Shinto. It was the Shinto that existed before things started to get defined. And then later on, you have many other, that reminds me, you have many other levels of Shinto as well that kind of develop over that. We're going to talk about that as well. I want to pass out little pamphlets to everybody as well. Just remind of that. Thank you. On the top, you'll see this means kami. That's the kanji for kami. So there's a little bit of information on there as well for everyone to take a look at. So yeah, there is a little bit of that coming there. That would probably be what I would consider sectarian Shinto, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But very similar, very similar. At this point though, in the progression, it's still very early. So then of course there's Ko-Shinto, which was like early prehistoric Shinto, which had no founder, nothing like that. And then of course there's a popular Shinto. Yes?
Were there some variations in the type of Shintoism that was practiced, but it tended to change a bit depending on what clan was in charge of the country?
Right.
Yes. Yes, there was a lot of variation, a lot. So it's really interesting you mentioned that because the goddess Amaterasu, who became eventually the predominant kami of Japan and was the...
Because she's supposedly who the royal family in Japan is descended from.
Yes.
But it wasn't until that the clan of the royal family actually took charge of Japan that she became like one of the main kami of the country.
Exactly. So Japan, the structure of Japan was made up into different clans. So different clans had different patron deities or particularly tutelary deities, right? They just existed in certain areas, maybe just this mountain or just this forest, whatever. Well then, it actually came to be that when the Japanese clan, which is now the Japanese royal family, took over, their patron kami became the main kami of the country. Just kind of de facto. And it wasn't necessarily, and I think that more than likely what probably happened is the stories that surrounded Amaterasu, which made her kind of that great-great-grandmother of the first emperor, was more than likely tailored after the fact that clan became that predominant clan. Does that make sense? So they kind of legitimized themselves by relating with that story.
Right.
As we all know, the Corellian tradition has a lot of their basis in Native American beliefs, and Shintoism has a lot of similarities in the way they have, like nature spirits versus kamis, or their respect for the planet. There's a lot the two religions have in common.
Absolutely. So they talk about, popular or folk Shinto, which kind of developed a little bit later. It was like a little bit more differentiated, but it was still kind of like, kind of what I mentioned, certain kami were worshipped by certain clans or in certain areas, and they kind of started to develop certain relationships with these kami that endured, and it became kind of like a folk Shinto. And then of course you get to Jinja Shinto, which we're going to talk about with a lot of the stuff that I have today. It's called Jinja Shinto. The term shrine Shinto, which is a sect of form of Shintoism, which you have in your pamphlets there, is also known as Jinja Shinto. Refers specifically to the time when Shinto became the state religion during the Meiji Restoration, which happened in the 1860s in Japan. I use it at this stage of the class to refer to the shift in focus from the sacred out of doors to the in the building sort of experience. Having been influenced by Buddhism, Shinto developed a strong affinity for the building of sacred shrine buildings and housing the spirit of different kami. Shrines have existed in Japan for thousands of years, and many of the shrines were built in or near the original sacred groves of antiquity, or sometimes they were built in central sacred locations to particular tribes or clans. These shrines often had sacred trees or stones within the precincts. So what happened was, they would have a sacred grove with trees, and they would kind of demarcate the grove off with like a rope or something, some sort of a rope, some sort of a barrier. And then in the center of there would be a tree. And they believed that that tree, although itself may not have been sacred itself, it became kind of like an antenna. So when they called on the kami and they asked for the kami came down, and they used the term allotted the tree, kind of possessed the tree. And then the tree itself became a way that they could interact with that particular kami. The same thing is true of the worship with rocks, sacred rocks as well. So very similar. The kami would kind of possess the rock, and then the rock would become a way that they could interact with the kami and the spirits. And of course that later develops into what is now Shrine Shinto as well. So technically speaking, Shinto doesn't have any sacred texts. There was no revelations. There was no Muhammad or Jesus or Moses or somebody that came and said, hey, listen, this is what Shinto's supposed to be. It is the most important texts in the Shinto pantheon are the Kojiki, which is the first one. Kojiki means the ancient chronicles of Japan, Kojiki. The second one is the Nihon Shoki, which is the Chronicles of Japan. And if memory serves me, the Kojiki came first, and that has a lot of the early myths about the different gods and goddesses, kami. And then the Nihon Shoki went from what we would consider mythic time, when the kami spirits were creating the world and all this stuff was happening, to more when humans were getting involved. And then when you get to the Nihon Shoki, you get to stories about the early emperors, which may have been mythical, and their relationship with the divine, and how the kami created, these people, and how everything happened. So it's kind of a later progression in that way. Over time, Shinto developed in many ways as it interacted with other faiths and politics. Where Shinto began as a folk religion, being wholly experiential and shamanic, it later developed to become a lot more structured. Early folk Shinto developed a form which became centered around the home shrine. So what we call the home shrine is called the kamidana. Kamidana means God shelf. So the practice and worship of using the home as the center point for it, they would have a what is called as domestic Shinto. We will discuss more about that a little bit later. Because the imperial household of Japan was believed to be the descendants of Amaterasu, and thus the emperors were divine because they were related to her. The imperial family later figured widely into the religious landscape in the cohesion of the Japanese people. This imperial family Shinto, also called imperial household Shinto, revolved around rituals performed exclusively by the royal family. So where you might practice at home by yourself, with your kamidana, your god shelf, you, on behalf of your family, on behalf of your territory in the whole country, the emperor and his family would go into the shrine in the palace, and they would perform ceremonies and rituals for you and for the whole family on your behalf. And that was not something that you ever were part of. It was only the royal family. It was believed that the princess of the royal family was like the chief priestess, essentially, of the whole country. And it was her job to do these rituals and things on behalf of the whole country. So that was something, it was called Imperial Household Shinto, was never something that normal people could do. A sectarian form of Shinto also developed as more and more shrines were established, and more kami became enshrined in the shrines. Larger and more important shrines, which enshrined popular kami, became mother shrines or like main shrines, and then they branched off to form smaller shrines and everything like that. So in Japan, there's a lot of different shrines. So you have. And so, kind of talking about the shrine a little bit. I don't know if I mentioned it here in the class. Yes, no, I think I will. So we'll talk about that more in a little bit. Okay, perfect. So shrine Shinto is one of the oldest forms of Shinto that's kind of worshipped today. Imperial household Shinto, unfortunately, isn't practiced much anymore. It's after World War II. After World War II, and I'm sure many of you know this just from history, one of the stipulations was that the emperor had to come out publicly and say, "I'm not divine." And the reason for that was because the Western powers that eventually took over Japan and occupied Japan up until like the 50s, I think, they felt that, and a lot of Japanese people themselves felt this way too, that the government was using their divine right and their divine heritage as a way to get people to do things for them.
And to fight their wars.
Right, and to fight their wars and to do all this stuff for them. And so they built up this whole rhetoric about nationalism, and this is the Japanese way, and we're the descendants from Amaterasu, and we have the right to do this, and it's on and on and on. And it turned into a sort of a battle cry that the government used to mobilize people to fight World War II, essentially. And then eventually after that, they decided that one of the things was to kind of cut the head off the dragon, so to speak, was to come out and say the emperor's not divine, so that he can't ever try to do that again. Unfortunately. So now after World War II, now we have, this severely secularized form of Japan where, they don't really do that. Of course, the emperor still does some minor things. He still visits a lot of shrines. I'm sure you probably heard in the news a couple years ago about the emperor was all in an uproar because he went and visited a shrine enshrining war veterans, some of which were people that may have actually fought in World War II. And so because of that, everyone was like, oh my gosh, it's not really the right thing to do because you're supporting, in some way, the atrocities of World War II. So everyone was pretty upset about that. One thing that was really interesting, a story I want to tell you, is there are only about 3 Shinto shrines in the United States. 2 of them are in Hawaii. One of them is in the mainland United States, which is located near Seattle. The one located near Seattle is an off branch, a branch shrine of the main shrine, which is in Japan. The high priest of that shrine, his name is Guji. His name is the high priest. He actually was in World War II, and he actually writes a book. It's called Kami no Michi. And it's a really good book. I actually read it. One time he talked about how he really didn't want to go into the war, but he ended up going into the war. Apparently his brothers, he had like 2 older brothers who were supposed to take over the father's business, being the priest. This is a form of sectarian Shinto. The family ran the shrine, operated the shrine, performed all the worships to that particular kami, which was almost like a family patron kind of thing. But of course now it's become a really important shrine. It's like 2,000 years old, whatever. Well, it's a lot of shrines, even some churches and temples, Buddhist temples in Japan are still, run by the family. So the family, your children succeed you, they take over the shrine or the temple, they do what they got to do. Their children, same thing, it stays in the family. So it's like a family business. Anyway, so he was in World War II. He went to war, got stationed in the Philippines. When the war was over in the 1940s, they apparently, the thing they used to do back then was they would fly with planes and they would drop these pamphlets and say, oh, the war's over, you can come home or whatever. So apparently they did this. Well, apparently they never sent anybody to pick up these soldiers that they had left on these bases in, maybe it was New Guinea, I can't remember. Maybe it was Papua New Guinea, or maybe it was, I thought it was the Philippines, at some of these other places. So the author of this book, Kami no Michi, who later became the head priest of the shrine, he was stranded for like several years in the jungle. And people that were in his platoon died from eating poison berries. They got sick, they got tuberculosis consumption, got colds, died. A lot of them died. It was almost like several years before the Japanese actually came and picked them back up. And there was actually a story in the news a couple of years ago about a guy that was still living in the forest, and he thought the war was still going on. They're like, no, it's been over for like 30 years or whatever. Did you hear that?
I was just thinking about that. As soon as you said the thing about the pamphlets and like nobody like coming to bring, I'm like, oh my god, like when did I hear about that? That was really recent, like, or was it recent? Like, I couldn't remember. And like all I could remember was like they had to like bring in like the Japanese authorities to like tell this guy, and then he thought that they were like plants or moles or something, like that he was spying, or they were spying, or that they were like, you know, brainwashed or something. Like, do we know ever what happened to him?
I thought they actually like had to like forcibly extract him or something.
Well,
they like took him out.
From what I read, they actually managed to find a guy that was living in Japan that had been in his platoon or something. That they actually, even though he was retired, they had to fly him all the way out to where this guy was hiding in the jungle, so they could convince him the war was really over and it wasn't just a trick.
I mean, that was like really happened.
Such trauma.
Yeah, and these people went through so much, and and he came back, and apparently his the head priest Guji came back, and his brothers, I think before then, had passed away, and he ended up taking on the family business and becoming the head priest. I think it's Yamamoto. I think is his last name. Yamakage, I think is. I can't remember, but it's a really great book if you ever get a chance to read it. The first part of it is almost like autobiographical, and then he goes in and talks more specifically in depth about Shrine Shinto. So it's really interesting. But you find a lot of times this sectarian form of Shinto kind of develops around a particular kami, and then a certain family kind of takes it over, and they start to kind of do all of this with it. Over time, Shinto developed in many ways as it interacted with other faiths and other politics, like I said. Shinto is probably, Shrine Shinto is one of the oldest. One source claims that at one point there were 200,000 shrines throughout Japan, all over the country, 200,000. And I mean, Japan's like the size of a little bit bigger than California. I mean, just imagine 200,000 shrines in Japan. Due to World War II, the number of shrines went from 200,000 just down to 80,000. They closed a lot of them. What happened was, and I'm not sure if I talk about this, actually I do, I'll save that because there's so much. So Shinto progressed from folk religion to a structured faith system. There were many bumps along the way. There were periods of strong adherence to Shinto and times of fleeting interest in the subject. As Buddhism became more popular in Japan, Shinto was forced to battle for adherence. At one point in Japanese history, Buddhism and Shinto became so close that they actually formed their own like mix. And today it's really hard to tell them apart. If you walk down, you can see, oh, there's a Shinto shrine, there's a Buddhist temple, but you can't really tell. And a lot of Buddhist shrines, even today, still enshrine Shinto kami. They have what they're called auxiliary shrines, which are these little shrines that they have on their grounds. So it's still, it's still hard to tell them apart. And there's still, yes?
I think that one of the reasons why Buddhism took off so well in Japan and why the Japanese people didn't really like revolt against it is because the belief system doesn't really contradict the Shinto religion, so there's no reason why they can't coexist, because they don't say, oh well, your religion is fake because of this, and vice versa.
Absolutely, and that's one of the major differences between Western religious mindset and Eastern religious mindset. In the West, we think, no, you can't be. You have to choose it. You have to do that. You have to only be Christian. You have to only be Jewish because there's only one God, right? In the East, they're like, well, you can be, and a lot of times, especially in China, people were Buddhist, they were Taoist, and they were Confucian. So it was like that you could be all three, and that happened very often in Japan with Buddhism and Shinto as well. At one point in the religious history, Buddhists believed that kami were simply the emanation or avatars of the Buddha. and they felt that the kami, like all beings, needed liberation. And so a lot of Zen priests would frequently go to Shinto shrines, and they would pray certain sutras at the shrines to encourage the kami spirits to reach nirvana. This was really more of a political move, I think, at certain times to get the Buddhist practitioners and the Buddhist government in a lot of ways to take over that. As Buddhism and Shinto developed, their paths crossed and sometimes merged. As history marched on, Buddhism became so popular and so oppressive that the government felt they had to make a stand. They decided that Shinto was quintessentially Japanese. It was born in Japan, it had Japanese customs and culture. It was more Japanese than Buddhism was. And so it should be protected as cultural and natural heritage. The Japanese emperor at the time, Emperor Meiji, decided to establish Shinto as a state religion. So what he said was, basically, listen, Shinto from now on is the new religion in the state. We're going to perform household Shinto. We're going to do all of these state practices and things for the government, but it's a state religion, which meant that all of the priests became state officials. All of the temple and shrine grounds became the properties of the government.
Scary.
So it was scary because they basically took over everything and just said, okay, this is the way it is. The thing was, though, is that a lot of priests became very influential. And a lot of priests of older shrines became very, very powerful. And they lorded over so many other smaller shrines. They became very, very powerful. And of course, that was what was called the Meiji Restoration, which a lot of things happened. They actually formed a government branch that basically controlled all of the Shinto shrines. And then, of course, there was probably a lot more proselytizing that was happening. But at that point, that's when a lot of other things started to happen, which it institutionalized Shinto as a faith. It established the emperor as the supreme ruler in the cosmology. It changed the priesthood from hereditary to government positions. And it also made all shrines property of the state. This change had a major impact on Shinto because it established both religious and political terms. It was also one of the most fascinating developments in the modern world religions, I think, because in no other place has an indigenous faith actually rose to that level. You know what I mean? Due to the strong emphasis on the worship of the ancestor or the emperor and the emperor's family as divine in the connection with the sun goddess Amaterasu, a strong sense of nationalism developed, which we already talked about a little bit earlier. The nationalism developed even further into a sense of militarism, which eclipsed the religious purpose of the Meiji Restoration in the beginning. The political environment led to military conquests decades later, and some claim it even led to the Japanese involvement in World War II. The terms, again, of the Japanese defeat were to, basically decentralize in the Shinto religion. The dissolution of state Shinto had devastating effects on the religious atmosphere of Japan. Even today, a lot of elders didn't really raise their children to be devout Shintoists because they felt that Shinto did have such a strong negative effect in their lives and in their experience and in their relationship. And a lot of people kind of just stayed away from it. They just stayed away from it altogether. When that was the dissolution happened, shrine priests were no longer government officials. They could perform rituals and ceremonies however they wanted to. They didn't have to follow the government rules anymore. Many shrines just closed. They didn't survive. They just closed them. Although the emperor was no longer considered divine in a political sense, he still had a really important place in Shinto, though, in the Shinto pantheon and the belief system. In response to the dissolution of state Shinto, many larger shrines developed their own organization, which they called the Association of Shinto Shrines, which exists today. It's called the Jinja Honsho. And the Jinja Honsho is really interesting, and it actually did a lot of different things and developed and kind of standardized a lot of Shinto, modern Shinto. So I just want to stop there for just a minute. I want to pass out some little pictures everyone can look at. One of our shrine members actually went to the shrine it's actually called Granite Falls, which is like just north house. Yeah.
Right.
And so she actually went there, visited the shrine and everything, and she took those pictures. So I printed them out to show everyone so that we would be able to see everything, which is really awesome. Also some really, really interesting pictures. And we're going to talk a little bit about what all that stuff is too. So now that you kind of have a background about Shinto, kind of where it came from, how it developed, let's talk exactly about what people Shintoists believe. What do people who practice Shinto believe? So there are, Shinto believes in the kami, or nature spirits, right? They inhabit the natural environment in the landscape. These kami are numerous and dwell in any number of natural objects, from specific trees, rocks, to mountains and bodies of water. Some of the most prominent natural objects have become paramount or prominent kami. For instance, one of the most important kami is the kami of Mount Fuji, Fujisan. Of course, Fuji is one of the largest mountains in Japan. One of the most important deities is what they call the first couple. So the basis for the Shinto belief comes from the Kojiki, and the Kojiki actually has a creation story, which I really love. So has anyone ever heard the creation story Izanagi and Izanami? So this is one of my favorite stories. I love it. So a little is really explained about kind of how they happened, but basically what happened is there were at the very beginning of creation there were these three deities, and they had really obscure names like Great, Growth, Kami, and just really strange names like that. But there were these three kami, and they eventually created all these other heavenly kami. And then finally from them, these two other kami were created, Izanami and Izanagi. Izanami being the female, Izanami being the male. I think it means he who comes and she who comes, or something, comes forth, something like that. And so they were like, hey, listen, we want to populate the earth. So we want you two to go down, and we want you to populate the earth. So they create this rainbow bridge, and the kami go down, Izanami and Izanami, they go down the rainbow bridge, and at the very end of the bridge, there's nothing but water. It's just this big, endless ocean. And Izanami, the man, has a spear, a jeweled spear that was given to him by some of these other creation deities in heaven. And he takes his spear and he puts the tip of it down into the water, and he stirs the waters up, and then he pulls it out. And when he pulls it out, one single droplet falls off the end of the spear. And when it does, it creates a landmass. So from there, they create the 8 islands of Japan. They create all of the islands of Japan. So the two come down, and they settle on the earth, and they create, there's this pillar in the middle. There's this giant pillar. And they said, okay, well, why don't we settle here, create this world, inhabit the earth with all the kami and all the beings and all the other wonderful stuff. And he's like, okay, well, let's get married. I'm like, okay, let's do it. So there's the pillar in the middle, and they said, okay, here's what I want you to do. I'm going to stand on this side of the pillar, and you're going to stand on that side of the pillar, and then we're going to come around, and we're going to meet in the middle, and then we're going to say, I want to marry you, whatever, whatever. So they do it. So they go ahead, and they come around, and they meet in the middle, and she's like, hi, I want to marry you, whatever. And he's like, okay, whatever. And at that point, I'm trying to remember, because the fact that she spoke first actually ends up to be a bad thing, because later on, some pretty terrible things happen, because she was the one who did it first. So with the jeweled spear, they do that. They lived happily on their own on their island. Izanami eventually becomes pregnant with a kami. So she becomes pregnant, and like, oh yeah, you're pregnant, wonderful, wonderful. It's the kami of fire. So when she gives birth to the kami of fire, he burns her to death.
Fantastic.
So she dies. She goes to the underworld. Izanagi is sick with grief. He's like, you know what? I'm going to go down to the underworld, and I'm going to save her, right? So he goes down to the underworld, and he goes to save her. And he finds her in the underworld, and she says, it's really dark down there, right? Obviously, because it's the underworld. So she bumps into him, and he's like, oh my gosh, I'm here to save you. And she's like, okay, well, why don't you stay over there, and I don't want you to look at me. Do not look at me, do not say anything to me. And you know what happens in these myths when they tell them to do something?
They do it
anyway. So she says, go over there, don't look at me, I don't want you to see me right now. I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to go talk to the Lord of Death, and I'm going to ask him if it's okay that I leave. So she goes over there, whatever. Apparently she goes into like a hut or something, and she's talking to him or whatever. Well, of course, Izanami doesn't follow the rules. He goes over, he creeps over, he looks at the window, and he sees that she is like decayed. She's full of maggots, she's dead, she's a corpse, essentially, right? She's in the underworld. So he freaks out, he's like, oh my god. She notices that he has seen her, jigs up. So he's like, I gotta get out of here. This is awful. So he runs out. She gets super mad that he didn't listen to her and everything, so she chases after him. And she has all these demons and all this other awful stuff that's chasing after him, right? So he finally gets topside, and there's a boulder he uses and covers the hole with. And so they're kind of talking to one another through the boulder. And they finally decide, you're dead, I'm alive, we need to just kind of separate at this point. Like, it's got to be the end of it. So it's kind of a juxtaposition between being on both sides of the pillar, getting married, being on both sides of the boulder, deciding to separate. So they finally decide, you stay down there, I'll stay up here, it's whatever. So he, realizing that he's become so defiled with kaka, underworld juices, he decides he's going to go to this river and he's going to cleanse himself. So he goes to the river, cleanses himself, and he's washing, and from his washing, all these other kami are born. One of the most important from his left eye, or maybe it's the right, I can't remember. From one of his eyes, the goddess Amaterasu, goddess of the sun, is born. From his right eye, her brother, who's Susanoo, is born. So they go on, and of course the stories go from there. And so that's kind of the whole creation story in terms of the Shinto pantheon. The sun goddess, Amaterasu, of course, figures very prominently into Japanese Shinto. First, she is the supreme ruler of all Amatsukami, all of them. And in this faith, the emperors are viewed as divine because they are her children, of course. Now, one of the stories that figures into the Shinto worldview in terms of the shrine is a story between Amaterasu and Susanoo, right? So Amaterasu is the goddess of the sun, right? So her radiance is what lights the earth, and everyone's happy and healthy, and the crops are growing. Well, one time, her and her brother, Susanoo, get in this big fight. He was a jerk. He did stuff wrong all the time. He was always doing stuff to bother her, doing stuff to bother the other kami. It was like a big deal. So finally, one day, they get into a fight, and frankly, I don't remember how the story goes. But they get into a big fight about something, and she's like, fine, you know what? I'm over this. I'm done with all this. I'm going over here. I'm going to go hide in a cave. So she goes over, she hides in a cave. She locks herself into a cave, right? So what happens? Same thing that happens in the story of Persephone next door. The world dies, right? No sun. So the other kami are like, oh my god, we got to do something about this, right? So they're like, what are we going to do? Let's try to get her out. So like, Materasu, come on out. Come on. She's not coming out. She's not playing, right? So they get this bright idea. How about we have a party out here, and then we convince her to come out because she's missing the party. So they decide to have this big party. The one kami decides they're going to hang these mirrors from a tree and have all this shimmery, shiny light, right? They decide that they're going to have a dancer. So there's another deity who's actually one of the principal kami that's enshrined at the shrine in Seattle, near Seattle. Her name is Amine Usume no Ikoto, right? So Amine Usume decides, guess what? I'm going to take my top off and I'm going to dance around, right? So she's dancing around bare-chested. Everyone's laughing and having a great time. All of a sudden, Amaterasu hears in the cave, something's going on up there. I didn't know what's going on. So she comes out of the cave, and when she does, her radiance is reflected by the mirrors in the tree. And they're like, listen, you're awesome. Come on out. So she comes outside, another kami closes the door, like, you're stuck out here now. So Amaterasu is stuck outside. So of course there are many different things from that story that develop into what is modern Shinto. Yes?
Wasn't there something in particular about the tree they hung stuff on?
Yes.
That helps her out?
Yes, the tree that they hung it on is the sacred sakake tree. I actually brought some. I actually have a sakake tree at home. It's called Celeria japonica. It's the actual sakake tree that they have in Japan. This sakake tree, which everyone's going to be able to take with them, actually is the sacred Shinto tree. It also is a tree. The branches are offered to the kami during certain ceremonies. So everyone's welcome to take one. You can take it with you.
I don't have any room at my house. So maybe you can
Well, I don't think you can actually grow them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're not growable. You can just
Okay.
take one as a souvenir.
Cool.
For everyone to print in a book or something.
Yeah, I don't think you can actually
Wow,
grow
it's
them.
so smooth. I like
So
it.
it's almost like a rhododendron almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
kind of what it
definitely.
reminds me of. But it's called Celeria japonica.
It reminds me of a fig.
It
Oh, does
does,
it?
doesn't it?
Kinda,
Yeah.
like this.
Mhm. And they are the sacred trees in Japan. Those are the trees that they believe the kami comes and alights during the ceremonies. So one of the most important aspects of, and there's so much more here I don't think I'm going to be able to cover, but I want to talk about the things I brought with me. One of the most important aspects of modern Shinto, again, is the kamidana, right? And you all saw the picture of the kamidana. That is actually my kamidana at home.
Wow.
And actually, inside my kamidana right now, the door is open, and inside of that is what is called an ofuda. An ofuda is what they call a yearly amulet, which you go to the shrine every year and you buy one. It's a very big convention. I actually brought two with me today. This is what they look like. So I actually have two. I have one for Amaterasu. So this is the ofuda for Amaterasu. So you go to the shrine and you buy it and you take it home and you put it in your kamidana. And then when you're ready to pray, the belief is that the spirit of the kami, the essence of the kami, is infinitively divisible. You can divide it infinitely. You can do as much as you want with the kami. So the belief is that they make these talismans, and they pray ceremony, and they ask the spirit of the kami to alight these tools.
So they invoke them into
Yes,
that, basically?
yes, into
Okay.
these tablets. And because the spirit of the kami is so big, and because the spirit of the kami is able to be divided infinitely, you can do that. So this is the one for Amaterasu, who is the, yes?
Doesn't that also link, like that paper talisman actually links you to a bigger shrine in Japan?
Yes.
It's,
Like the crystal web.
yeah,
Yes, exactly.
It's like that, or even like a window or something, you know?
Yes.
It's like,
So the kami will come and alight during the prayer, and then they go away. They don't stay there. So this is the one for Amaterasu. Again, Amaterasu is the principal kami of the Amatsu kami, right? And then I also have this one here, which is Sarutahiko no Mikoto. He is the principal kami of the Kunitsu kami. And his wife, who I mentioned a moment ago, which I didn't say, is Amine Usume no Mikoto, who is the kami who took her top off and danced for Amaterasu. So when you go to a Shinto shrine today, they have shrine maidens that will perform a dance. That dance is the replication of the dance that Amine Usume no Mikoto did for Amaterasu when she was in the cave. So you're reenacting that myth.
but I would imagine the modern version probably isn't topless.
Indeed, it is not. And then, of course, when you go to the shrine, you also have, there's what they call the amulet receiving window. That window is where you go and you purchase various things to take home with you. So it's once a year you go to the shrine, at least once a year. Normally it's on New Year's. That's why New Year's is called Hatsumode, the first shrine visit of the year. And it's sort of like a 3-day event. They go and you go to the shrine and you buy all your stuff for the year, and then you take the old ones and you return them with a donation. And then in February they have this big purification ceremony where they burn them all, of the old ones. So this is one of the things that you always want to make sure you get. Then they also have what's called Omimori, right? So I brought one of mine. They're normally bigger. This is a miniature one because it goes on your bag or whatever. And basically what it is inside of it, it has, you can handle it if you'd like. Inside of it, what it has is it's very similar to this. It has like a little miniature, this is called an ofuda. It almost has like a miniature ofuda in it, and it normally has the name of the kami on it, and sometimes it'll also have some other things, like certain things that you want to have, and that's the purpose why you purchase them.
They also have ones you can buy specifically for your pets.
Yes, we have that.
That's cool.
Yeah. So the purpose, it's basically a good luck charm. That one there is called Katsu Onsen, which means personal protective charm. So that one goes on your backpack, goes on your purse, goes wherever as a way to protect you. Yes, when you're traveling. So this is an example of one. Normally they're bigger. You can get ones for all sorts of things. You can get ones for protection, for childbirth, for good relationships, for travel.
I've been like boys where there's like these like dramas and they usually have like stuff like that.
Yes, absolutely. So this is an Omimori, right? And then you also purchase these. This is called an emma. Okay? And what you do with the emma is normally it has something on it. Now this one here, this is Sartihiko, Nomikoto, right? This is the principal kami of Earth, Kunitsu no kami, right? So and you can see here, there's the main shrine in Japan, and then there's the shrine in America. The sister, the parent shrine and the daughter shrine right there. So this is the one that I got from the shrine, right? The cool thing about this is that different shrines have different pictures on them. And some of the shrines, it's funny because I was reading about this shrine recently. There in Japan, it was the setting of some really well-known anime. So because they were the setting for some really cool anime, they actually made their emma with anime characters on them.
That is so cool.
So that when people came to the shrine, they were like, you know what I mean? How cool is that, right? So there's all sorts of different ones you can get. They actually have a bigger one that has a stand with it too, that you can get as well. So I actually have with me
Is that made from a specific wood too?
It looks like it's probably either pine or maybe
I was
like
curious.
cypress or something. I don't know if it has to be,
Yeah.
but it looks like a lot of them, even in like the shrine constructions in Japan, they're made with really light wood, like a pine or something like that. They like it to be very fresh and very clean. The belief is that you can make a building and say, hey Kami, I want you to come here. But if the building is garbage and the building is full of trash, the Kami's not going to want to come here. It only becomes a jinja when the Kami comes down. And when the Kami comes down, they basically purify the whole area. It has to be pure for them to come, but once they've come, it purifies the area of malignant spirits, of negative energy, all that stuff. They purify all of that when the Kami spirit actually comes down.
Since you were just focusing on the time board there, I think sometimes you can actually write like wishes or something on the back.
Yes.
And then outside the shrines, there's like this
Called
ride
Emadan.
where you
Hang it.
you have to buy it, then you write your
Wish
wish
on
on it, and you hang it up. Whereas in the U.S., they're a little harder to come by, so we just keep it because it looks cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the real purpose of them. You go to the amulet receiving window, you buy your Ofuda, you buy your emma, you write your wish on it, you hang it up.
And as Karelians, we've actually been inspired to adopt a similar practice where we've
For Lunasa,
made our own.
I've started doing this traditionally with our temple, where we actually make our own emma, and we write on the back of them, and we hang them in the tree, and then when they get really worn out by the weather, I take them down and I burn them. So everyone's getting an emma as well.
Thank you.
You're
That's
welcome.
so cool.
Now, this here is called Gofu. A Gofu is basically a protective charm that you tape on the wall by your house, and it protects your home. And so it's basically like a talisman, essentially. And all these things here technically are supposed to be replenished every year. Take it back to the shrine, give a donation, they burn it, you buy new ones. These ones are a couple years old, but I'd actually kept these. We're moving here at the end of the month, so I took this off the wall to show everybody that I'm going to send it back to the shrine. All of this stuff here gets sent back to the shrine when I'm done with it. And another thing as well, because again, we are nearing the end so quickly, I'm not able to discuss too much more about Shinto worship and going to a Shinto shrine and things of that nature, but I want to talk a little bit real quickly about when you go to visit a Shinto shrine. So if you ever have the opportunity to go to Seattle and you go and you see it's called the Tsubaki Kanagara Jinja, if you get a chance to go there and visit that shrine, the first thing you do is you go to, it's a purification font. There's a practice in Shinto called misoji, where you purify yourself. By purifying yourself, you're allowing the pure divine energy of the kami, and it has a lot in some ways to do with chi, and Taoism and things of that nature. You're kind of aligning your chi to positive energies and things of that nature. So you perform misoji in the shower. It's actually traditionally performed under a waterfall or in a stream or some kind of water. Basically ritual purification. Now, when you go to the shrine, every time you go into the shrine, you perform a form of michoji, where there's a ladle and there's a basin of water, and you take the water and you pour it on your left hand. Then you pour it on your right hand, and then you cup some and you put it in your mouth, and then you spit it out on the ground, and then you reach your hand out again. So that's the step for doing the misoji, and then you go into the temple, or to the shrine, excuse me, and you can purchase any of this stuff there as well when you go.
There's actually a Facebook page for the for one of the biggest Shinto shrines in America,
Yes,
which
Tsubaki Shrine.
maybe
which I
later
follow, yes.
you might want to post a link to their page and the Carillion membership hub.
I can do
anyone
that,
wants
absolutely.
to
Or the
do more
Lustration
research
group
on
as well.
it. Yes.
Absolutely, because there's so much information. I thought I was going to get through it very quickly, but apparently not. And so one other thing that I wanted to do is, there's something that they do in Shinto very similarly as well. This is what they call Hitogata. Has anyone ever seen Hitogata before? They're normally made with rice paper. So I actually printed a whole bunch out so we can do this as well, which we're going to actually do right now. So the Hitogata is basically, it's a scapegoat. It's a ritual scapegoat that you use. So for anyone, I think it's in the second degree book, they talk about magical automations, and they talk about using the ribbons, tying the ribbons on the tree, right? And as the tree, the wind flaps, it's doing whatever the magic is that you did. The Emma is very similar to that. So keep that in mind. That this here is a form of a scapegoat. So what you do, which we're going to do right now, is I would like everyone to take one. I'll give you the one that's already folded. And then you have to fold it on the dotted line. And normally what the purpose of these are is you write your name on it, you write your date of birth on it, and then you put your thumbprint on it with red ink, which I have as well. And then what you do is you take this, and this is you, essentially. And you are going to, traditionally you use it and you rub it on some part of your body.
Isn't it basically taking like the negative energy out of yourself, and
Yes.
you attach to this to remove
Yes.
it from yourself, and
And
then
then
you
you burn
basically
this.
it's a form of purification.
Yes. Yes. So sometimes what they'll do, there's like different shrines in Japan have different purposes. There's one shrine in Japan that I really like, and if I could ever get a chance to go, I would. The shrine, apparently back in the day, somebody had made some prayers for issues with leg pain. So now people that have issues with their legs and with leg pain go to the shrine, and what you do is you hike your pants up and you walk through the stream, all the way up the stream, right? And then when you get to the top, then you take something like this and you could actually float it in the water, and it does a very similar thing, purification. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give everybody one of these. You're going to take a pen, and I'd like for everybody to write your name on it, and also write your
On the back of the front.
on the front, and write your birth date on it. Okay, and then after that, we're going to take some of this, and I practice this at home, so you don't want to press too hard on this, because then you'll miss your own fingerprint. Just really lightly.
Does it matter where we do it?
Nope, nowhere, anywhere. No particular place. And then we're going to just take a little bit, just a quick tap, and then there you go.
Okay.
Yep, that works. Okay, so see how John did his? He put his thumbprint on it, right? So now this is his. And then you take it and you want to rub it somewhere on your body, or in this case, because we're Carillion, we're a little bit different, maybe if you have something going on in your life that you want to transfer into it, you could put it to your forehead, do a prayer, send whatever issues you have into it. And then when you're finished, we're going to come up here and we're going to light them on fire and we're going to drop them in the cauldron.
And there's a sink right there in case something
Yes,
drops.
in case there's something. Because I'm always about fire safety. Yeah. I did it too hard and it turned into like a mess. You couldn't even see my finger, it was just a big blob of red. Are you need more?
Yeah. There we go.
Phoenix collect them over and really was it so smoky.
Yeah, right. What are you guys doing over here in front place down? Very good. Would you like to do it? Okay, we are using what they call Hitogata. This is a Hitogata. And you take your name You put your name and your birthday on it, and then you put your thumbprint on it with red ink, which I have up here. And then if you have physical ailments, you can rub it on the part of your body where there's a physical ailment. Or if you have other issues going on in your life that you want to release, you imprint them into the scapegoat, also known as the Hitogata, and then you burn it and drop it in the cauldron. Okay. And for people who have red thumbs, you can wipey with this.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm good.
You're good.
Yeah.
Did you want one?
I'm a freaking blonde, I guess.
And the red is right
Oh
here.
well. I guess we'll know it's mine. It's all red now.
You know, I don't know if any of you guys are into cartoons or not, but it's actually surprising how much information about Shintoism is mixed into like anime and video games.
Of course, yeah. I mean, it's particularly since it was like a daily, everyday life practice, you know. And it also exists within Budo. Within Budo, like I saw like a little kamidana up there. And I was like, oh my gosh, yes! I can't wait for this.
I know.
Really cool.
Kyle actually went to university with a Japanese woman named Masako, and her family was Christian, even though they lived in Japan. Oh yeah, so Catholic, but Shintoism was so ingrained in their culture that they would still go to the shrine every year, and they do all these practices.
For the Hatsumode, remember the first shrine visit of the year, they'll go to Hatsumode every year, and they would still give money to the shrine and everything. It was so part of their culture. The interesting thing about the Japanese is that they don't consider any of this stuff to be religious. They get up in the morning, they go to their kamidana, and they perform their prayer. The prayer is 2 claps. Actually, it's 2 bows, 2 claps, and then 1 bow. So they get up every morning, they open the doors of their kamidana, they perform their morning prayer, and they go about their day. And they don't think that it's religious, but it's religious.
I was going to say something. We used to do that at the dojo all the time.
Yes.
And it is 2 claps, and then you bow, and then you do 1 clap, and then you bow.
Yes. And
That's, I mean, I don't know if it like varies.
I think it does vary a little bit, because I know that in like Inari, if you don't know who Inari is, Inari is the fox god who is the god of rice. And Inari, in his worship, you do half a bow, and then you do 2 bows, and then you do 2 claps, and then you do 1 half a bow, and then you do 1 full bow. So it's a little bit different. Traditionally, it's 2, 2, and 1, but it's a little bit different than that. So anyone who wants to come up, please do. You can light it there, and then just drop it in there. Phoenix, would you mind folding it on the dotted line? Yep, and you're good to go.
Okay, here's your pen because
Thank you,
Melanie.
Oh.
And then when you're finished, please take an Emma with you. You can write on it and take it home and hang it in a tree at home. And Phoenix, you're welcome to have one as well. I have like 10. Probably enough for almost everybody here.
This is so exciting.
And I was letting them know, you didn't see it right there. Those are Ofuda. They're basically talismans that you buy from the shrine. And they're imbued with the essence of that particular kami. And then when you pray in that direction to that talisman, you're essentially praying to the kami. Which is really interesting. In Japanese, there's something called kotodama. Kotodama means the spirit of the word. So if you think about other religions, like for instance in Islam, they don't believe in Islam that the only Quran is the Arabic Quran. Any other Quran that's written in English, written in any other language, is a translation of the Quran, because the one that's written in Arabic is the one that they believe to be the most important one. Same thing in Judaism, same thing. I hope not.
It's very small.
Right. That's pretty much confusing.
You're getting nervous.
I mean, like, I just saw the smoke, that's all. I'm like, oh. And I just, my kitchen has a very sensitive fire alarm.
Oh,
Sorry, I'm just paranoid, I
I
guess.
cleansed a hotel room and set off their alarms one time.
That's hilarious.
That's what we should have. We should have cleansed our hotel room.
And so the same thing is true in Japanese. A lot of the prayers that they read at the shrines are written in like an older form of Japanese.
Right.
And a lot of priests don't even know what it means.
Yeah, that's what
Because it's written in this old language. But
Should I open the door?
yeah, go ahead. The names of the kami that are written on the Ofuda, that spirit of the word, kotodama, is believed in some ways also to be the connection with the kami. So that kind of the name is the thing, is the connection. There's a doorstop out there.
they're so similar.
Yes.
You know, I mean, it's just,
Yes.
It was like,
it's so cool.
like your partners both from like Korea, like
Yes.
like I know know a lot about Korea and
Uh-huh.
stuff, and like I was seeing like informational videos and stuff, people going in and then doing the bows
Mhm.
and then they like get on their knees and then bow again and
Mhm.
then stand up and go like clean or like with like incense and
Uh-huh.
stuff, and it's like how similar they are is like
Uncanny.
yeah, it's like,
Yeah. It's fascinating. It's fascinating. Unfortunately, there is so much more we could have got through. If anyone else is interested, excuse me, I will post it online. Talking about different forms of worship. I have some pictures. I don't know if they're listed. I think I did have most of them here. Of course, this is my kamidana. This here is the outdoor shrine. It's called a hokura to Inari. So you see the statues of the foxes, right? And then of course in there is an Ofuda to Inari. And Inari's colors are red. So if ever you see it's called a tori, which is a gate. This gate here is called a tori. Not to be confused with not to be confused with tori, which means bird. So basically it's a perch for the bird. That's why it's called tori. So tori, they're red if it's for Inari. And there's a big shrine in Kyoto for Inari. There's like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tori, just like one in a row after another. It's almost like a tunnel, and they're all red.
Yeah, I saw
I've
like
seen-
there's this one anime on Netflix,
Mhm.
and it was like they're on an island. It was like an inhabited island, and it was just
Uh-huh.
like a mount, like a hot tile mountain, just like red
Full.
ones all the way up to
Full
the
of
top.
Are those some little cartoons or whatever?
Yeah.
Anime.
My,
yeah.
yeah, my 14-year-old loves all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
it's the Japanese cartoons.
Yeah,
That's the
loves
other
those
one.
things.
You know, giant eyes, small.
Yeah.
small heads.
Small features.
It's cool.
Small features.
This is the Emadan.
Yep.
We were talking about that one. This is an outside shrine. I think Amaterasu is in there. Actually, no, I lied. Oh, I don't have one from Amaterasu. I can't. I think it's Amine Usame no Mikoto is inscribed in that one. This is these little these little white zigzag streamers. Those are called shide. So those, the rustling of the shide is supposed to scare away evil spirits, and they also denote sacred space. So I don't think there's. Oh, you see the
So
shide in
cool.
line,
Yeah,
right?
those are big.
And then around it is called shimenawa, which is a hemp rope that they use
Cool.
to demarcate a sacred tree. They'll sometimes put it on rocks, sacred rock. This is actually at our house. This is our outside hokura, which is an outside shrine. Normally hokuras are more like for like folk Shinto. You know what I mean? It's not like a big deal, but they're normally for like smaller local deities. And so inside you actually see right here it says Kairu no Kami. Kairu in Japanese means frog. So inside there is enshrined a frog, because I have a thing for frogs. So we actually had kept the frog shrine on our temple grounds for a while, but we're moving, so again, we're not going to have that. And then of course there's another tori with the shimenawa and all that there. There's actually a shrine in Japan where they have a huge one. It's huge. I mean, like huge shimenawa, and it's all braided and everything. And then they have, with the tassels that come down are so big, they're probably bigger than like me, like my shoulders, you know what I mean? And what people do is they'll take money and they'll throw it up and try to catch it inside of the bristles of and when they catch it, it's a good luck.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so it's a really, really fascinating study. So sorry it took so long.
Oh, thank you very much. That was
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was like, Phoenix was like, oh, you should like go to this one. And I was like, I was planning on it because we're